I'd like to start today's video by first saying thank you to everyone who took the time to comment or vote on a little post I made a while back asking you what videos you'd like me to make in the future. The Deluge versus the OP1 came out on top, so I'll be working on that video in the days to come. Stay tuned for that. But today, I want to talk to you about the Sub 37 versus the Sub 25. As many of you noticed and commented in my previous video, the Sub 37 back there found its way back into my studio a little while back. Now, lots of you were left wondering why would I go with the 37 after I was raving about the 25 in my review about it. Well, rest assured, my opinions about the Sub 25 have not changed at all. So why get the 37 then? Well, as I said in my review about the Sub 25, I am not a reasonable person and I have no intention of becoming one. However, in the spirit of full transparency, and since I'll always keep it real with you guys, the real reason is I have a very small peepee, and I tend to overcompensate by buying expensive synths. But I digress. The Sub 37 is a synth that I profoundly regretted selling from the moment I let it go. So when I found a good deal on a used one that was in mint condition, I jumped at it. I just had to. So now that I have both the Sub 25 and the Sub 37, I thought it might be a good time to make a little comparison between the two. But instead of just showing you the spec sheets or doing a side-by-side sound comparison, I wanted to approach this in a way that made sense to me. You see, both of these synths are feature-packed. Both of these produce earth-shattering bass, face-melting leads, and everything in between. Both of them are beautifully designed and are made with quality materials. So I think the real difference in which one you should pick lies somewhere else entirely. I think it depends entirely on who you are and where you are in your journey, both as a musician and as a synthesist. So today I want to make this comparison from that perspective, taking into account the pros and cons in different workflows and real-life scenarios, and maybe this will help you decide which one will be better fit for you. If you're already subscribed, welcome back and thank you so much for your support. If this is your first time here, hi, welcome to the midlifesynthesist. Let's get started. You might think that the only reason for going for a Sub 25 versus the Sub 37 might be the price, since objectively the Sub 37 has a lot more going on and bigger is always better, right? Well, that's not always the case. You see, I think that in a real life scenario in everyday use, a lot more stuff comes into play. So today I want to consider things like live use versus studio use, and if you're going to be using this alone or with other gear. So let's dive in. So in the studio use scenario, I'm going to divide this into two very broad groups, and that'll be DAW inclined musicians and DAW-less inclined musicians. And I say inclined because I don't really know anybody who just uses one or the other exclusively. Generally, you use a mixture of both, tending to use one more than the other. But for argument's sake, we're going to use those two groups. So if you're mainly a DAW-based musician and you're just looking for a very nice analog monosynth to bring that warmth and Moogy sound into your mix, the Sub 25 might actually be a much better fit for you than the Sub 37, and here's why. First of all, you get the smaller footprint, which, especially if you're in a small space or home studio, you'll definitely notice the difference. Second, most of the features that the Sub 37 has over the Sub 25 can be pretty much compensated by MIDI automation and plugins, such as the Arpeggiator or the sequencer, for example. And by making up for these missing features on the Sub 25 via MIDI, you'll actually get the same quality sound in duophonic mode that you get on the Sub 37, but for around half the price, which is not a bad trade-off at all. Also, if you're already using your computer screen and you're pretty much used to VSTs, you can actually program the Sub 25 with the wonderfully responsive and very stable editor librarian that Moog includes for the Sub 25. Using this software, you get full control and access to all the parameters in your Sub 25, which, by the way, kind of solves some of my biggest gripes with the Sub 25, as are the hidden functions and the inability to name your patches directly on the synth. Now, don't forget, the Sub 25 and the Sub 37 all receive and send MIDI through their knobs, so you actually get a very good MIDI controller in either one, which is pretty good for a DAW musician. In contrast, the Sub 37 might feel a bit like overkill, since you probably won't be using the onboard sequencer or the arpeggiator, and it will eat up a bit more space in your studio. Okay, so how about the DAW-less musician in a studio environment? Well, you might think I'd just recommend the 37 in that case, right? Actually, I'm not sure if it's that clear cut. You see, I think it mainly depends on what other gear you might have and your patience for programming and syncing said gear. The Sub 25 can really shine as part of an ensemble, a member in a casting crew of more synths and samplers and drum boxes. And the thing is, if you have something like, for example, the Dig Attack lying around, you can compensate for the lack of sequencer, and you can even add that missing LFO. On the other hand, the Sub 37 is a powerhouse. This thing will be a commanding presence in whatever studio setup that you're likely to put it in. Jamming on the Sub 37 is just pure unhinged joy. So if you're looking for a small setup with just 1 or 2 synths, the Sub 37 is definitely the way to go. And this brings us nicely to my other scenario, which is live use. As I said in my review of the Sub 25, its smaller form factor does make it a lot more comfortable to be transporting around town. Also, on a small stage, you're bound to appreciate that smaller footprint. If you don't need that many presets in your presentation, and you're going to be using this with other gear, then the Sub 25 might be just the right fit for you. However, that being said, if you're looking for a centerpiece for your performance, then the Sub 37 reigns supreme. And that's because I think the Sub 37 was actually a synth that was made with live performance in mind. And that's because it does have a few essential things that the Sub 25 doesn't. The screen, though tiny, does give you vital information, for example, the name of the preset that you just selected. So, especially if you don't have that much of a good memory, it's a lot more reassuring to be able to see if the preset that you're on is the correct one for the song that you're playing, instead of just hoping that you press the right button combination on the Sub 25. The inclusion of the Arpeggiator is something that live performers will appreciate greatly, as is the 3-octave keyboard. You see, 2 octaves is really tight to be playing live, especially on the duophonic mode, so that really does feel more at home and more comfortable when you're playing on 3 octaves. And that brings me to the final attribute, which I think that really separates the Sub 37 from the Sub 25, at least in live performance, and that is the Aftertouch. The Aftertouch gives you a level of expression and sentimentality that you can transmit through your performance that I don't think you can really get either with the mod wheel or with an expression pedal. I feel it's only comparable to the level of expression you might see with a guitarist when he starts giving that vibrato to the strings or when he starts bending the neck of his guitar. You see, you can't really get that with a keyboard unless you have Aftertouch. And on the Sub 37, it's really well implemented in a very organic way that just seeps into your performance without you really knowing about it. So believe me when I say, if you know your way around a keyboard and you want a synth that really breaks through the noise and gives that level of impact that you're looking for, the Sub 37 is the way to go. Notice that in none of these situations have I brought up the way that these synths sound. And that's because even though they don't sound exactly the same, they both have extremely Moogy sounds. And by that I mean very warm, very analog, very premium. So I think that whichever one you choose, you're going to be happy in the sound department. So I wouldn't start my basis for choosing which one you want based entirely on sound. Finally, there's just one more thing I'd like you to consider when you're making the decision between buying the Sub 25 and the 37. Now, this last thing might be important to you, or you may not care at all, but I felt like it was important just to bring it up, and that is their place in synth history. I say this because I think that very few people would disagree with me saying that the Sub 37 has rightfully earned its title as a modern classic. And though the Sub 25 is a fine synth, I think it'll be remembered as just that. Instead, the Sub 37 will be remembered as something else entirely. It'll be remembered as one of the finest offerings ever made by the House of Moog. And at least to me, that's worth something. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next one.